Very excited to introduce this next session, which encompasses musical play. The following three presenters, Samantha Lane, Rachel Tonkin, and Angela Voyajolu, will be showcasing their work through key Froebelian principles, which focus on play through songs and creativity, all whilst working closely with families and young children. Music and songs are vital to young children's development, and Froebel harnessed this when he developed the mother songs, which are said to be his most important work. I'm sure I can speak for many of us here today when I say how excited I am to learn about the following projects, which focus on the importance of music and song and the joy and fun that they bring. Now, I would like to introduce our first presenter, Samantha Lane, who is the Artistic Director at Little Angels Theatre, with her presentation, Let's Play. Over to you, Sam.
Excellent. So as Holli mentioned, my name is Samantha Lane and I'm the Artistic Director at Little Angel Theatre, which is a children's puppet theatre in Islington in North London. And my job involves directing theatre for young audiences. So I have dedicated my entire career to playing, basically, specifically exploring what makes the best work for the very young. I work with very young audiences because, like Froebel, I believe that creativity is the essence of being human and fundamental to learning. And I choose theatre because through the use of symbols, as also Froebel says, a new world of ideas and objects opens, and children can begin to see their ideas given visible form. So today I'm going to talk to you about a Froebelian approach to making work for very young audiences. So in 2019, I made a show called The Bed. It's a theatre show and it uses simple object manipulation to bring to life different kinds of beds. It's based on a Sylvia Plath poem, The Bed Book, which she wrote for her own children. It's a really simple poem and it's basically a story of how lots of different beds get brought to life in much more interesting ways. So they're not just for sleeping in. So she creates submarine beds, jet propelled beds, elephant beds, all sorts of different beds in the poem. The show was aimed at toddlers, babies and toddlers from 6 months to 3 years, and for their parents and carers so that they could share the experience together. It was intended to last for 30 minutes and then there was a 15-minute stay and play at the end. A solo performer takes the audience on a journey, manipulating a large bed and turning it into a multitude of exotic different beds. So basically using lots of different props and lots of different things that you might find in a bedroom to tell that story. So it symbolically suggests these much more interesting beds. The show also encourages interaction and immersion and engages the senses. So as Anita Hughes says in Developing Play for Under Threes, babies and young children need to touch, taste, smell, shake and bang three-dimensional objects in order to develop thinking and learning skills. There's an odd pound sign on the end of that quote there. I don't know why, but forgive that, please. Interestingly, this contradicts the typical notion of what theatre is, a space where you sit very quietly in the dark and watch and listen in silence. Although increasingly, and particularly with theatre for children very young, this is changing. So the bed encourages the audience to interact as they watch. They touch the props, they feel the different textures, they feel a feather and water on their skin, they hear the atmospheric music and the sound effects. They're invited to sing along, to move around, to play and make noise. The whole experience quite naturally supports Froebelian principles. The first, if you can hit enter, shows it's a playful show. So as I mentioned, the babies can touch things, they can move around, they can it really engages the senses. It's creative in the sense that it utilizes the power of symbols. So the entire conceit is driven by the idea that a bed can be absolutely anything, not just as Sylvia Plath says in the text, a white little tucked in tight little nighty night little bed. Instead, it can be whatever or wherever the imagination takes you. The show and the stay and play is designed as a shared experience. So thinking about unity and connectedness there, it's shared as a family, you watch the experience together, or either with your parent or with a carer, and really creates a sense of community across the audience as a whole, even only for a short period of time. The entire experience also encourages freedom with guidance. The adults support the curiosity of the babies by helping them to feel and touch the objects, by encouraging their commentary if they're responding in some way, to join in with the actions, but also gently to gently guide them back to their laps when it's appropriate. The stay and play was also intended to further the experience, allowing the baby and toddlers to really get stuck in and explore with the pillowcase and feather. And they could do this with the support and knowledge that their parent or carer was close by. So the performer would demonstrate the play potential of objects throughout the show, and then the parents could play with their children in the pillowcase and the feather at the end. This stay and play was actually adapted for the second run of the show, which I'll talk about a little later. To date, we have performed the show 130 times. It's been attended by over 4,000 people in total. Unfortunately, we had to close. Yes, you can find the trailer on YouTube. I'm just popping those questions. If you go to the Little Angel Theatre website, the trailer is then the trailer is actually on the Little Angel's YouTube channel. So I'll post the comments for that in the chat at the end. Unfortunately, we had to close the second run of the show early because of COVID-19, but we were lucky enough to also get a YouTube commission this Christmas as part of the 12 Days of Cultural Christmas celebration, and the entire show was online from the 25th of December to the 5th of January, and it was viewed over 2,000 times across 3 countries, which is fantastic. We obviously weren't able to conduct the stay and play when the show was online, so we added a message from the performer at the beginning giving a list of items to gather. The next clip, which I doubt you'll be able to play either, which is the next slide, is actually the performer at the beginning of the filmed version of the show explaining some of the things that parents and carers could gather from around the home in order for them to have that kind of sensory experience, even though they were watching the show via a screen. It felt really, really important. The purpose of this clip is just to illustrate that watching at home, you could have that same sensory experience. It didn't matter that you were watching through a screen. If you gathered all of these materials, and then you could still have that, try to at least replicate as much as possible that live experience. If you can move on to the next slide for me, please. So the show received overwhelmingly positive feedback from both audiences and critics, but there was something about it for me that wasn't quite working. It wasn't so much the performance element really kept the children and the parents engaged, but the stay and play wasn't quite working. And it became apparent very quickly. Despite seeing examples in the show, the majority of parents were at a loss as to what to do with the feather and the pillowcase when they're left to their own devices. They seem to have forgotten how to play. If you can move on to the next slide for me. In my ignorance, I hadn't quite predicted that eventuality. As someone who is inherently playful and has dedicated their entire career to playing, it hadn't occurred to me that other adults might struggle with doing this, or that they had forgotten how to do it, or that it made them feel uncomfortable or embarrassed, perhaps. So it seemed to me that Picasso was right. Every child is an artist. The problem is staying an artist when you grow up. So I immediately realized that parents and carers needed more guidance in helping their children to play freely. We experimented with having the performer demonstrate things that the parents could do with the pillowcase and the feather, but we quickly realized that, again, they just started to imitate this, perhaps for a short period of time, and then lost interest again. So rather than it being sort of freedom with guidance, it felt quite dictatorial, it felt a little forced. And some parents also fed back that they felt quite exposed. So it's apparent that we needed to entirely rethink the stay and play. If you can move on to the next slide for me. So why was it that children with their natural curiosity found it really easy to participate in culture, whereas their parents and carers didn't? Perhaps it comes down to the fact that adults have grown up and have been exposed to ideas about the conformity of behaviour when experiencing culture, the sort of sitting in silence that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and many found it difficult to let go and relax. We were giving them permission to play, though. They either just didn't want to, or they no longer found it easy or natural and therefore felt uncomfortable. I guess it's that sort of classic thing where play is often viewed in contrast to work. It's a type of activity which is essentially unimportant. It's trivial. It's lacking in serious purpose. It's something that children do because they're immature, or something that they'll grow out of when they're adults. We've really conditioned adults to feel that way, and it just became, it was stating the obvious, but it became glaringly obvious with this particular production, and particularly in this stay and play elements at the end. So I know that it was my job to try and challenge that, bringing you kind of Froebel's classic quote about play being the highest level of child development. It's never trivial, it's serious and deeply significant. It just felt that I had to remind the adults that we were working with that this is the case. Could you move on to the next slide for me, please? So we needed something that would engage the children without feeling too onerous for the parents. I think I noticed somebody in the chat put a point about parents feeling nervous, and you're absolutely right. We were never asking them to perform. Actually, we were asking them to engage with their children. But even that could feel quite exposing when other people are looking on. And so, how could we do something that enabled them to feel that they were comfortable in that scenario? So I'd been introduced to Eleanor Goldschmidt's treasure baskets at the Froebel Archive in Roehampton, and I could immediately see how they could be adapted to be used for the stay and play in the bed. The fact that they're open-ended and abstract with a diversity of shapes and materials, as Toby says, made them the perfect resource. I don't want to preach to the converted. I assume that many of you are familiar with treasure baskets, but you know what they say about assumptions. So for those of you who aren't, they're a collection of natural, household and recycled objects presented together in one basket for a baby to explore. The picture that you see on the screen at the moment is one that I put together, although it's quite empty because she was the child involved there was very engaged and had moved most of it out. But that was one that I created for the stay and play for the bed. So the concept was pioneered by Goldschmidt, who believed that objects form a gateway to the outside world and create the first opportunity for making choices and decisions, as well as developing conceptual thinking. Just before the onset of expressive language, she believed that the greater the variety of objects, the greater the mental stimulation and the satisfaction for the baby. And so she advocated for quite a large number of objects in a basket, from 80 to 100. Which, far from being overwhelming, gave the baby or the toddler a much greater sense of choice. And you notice the little quote here, it said, food for the brain. She said, and I love this quote here from her, "We can never truly know what it's like to bite into a ripe, juicy peach until we've actually taken a bite for ourselves. Similarly, what do the concepts cool and smooth, prickly and rough actually mean unless we have caressed a pebble, picked up a pine cone, or fingered the bark of a gnarled tree?" We know that we were asking a lot of our audience. They were watching something, they were watching a bed, and watching that symbolize many, many other things. So how could we help them to relate that to the real? If we can move on to the next slide, please. So the bed is a show that uses objects to tell a story, and it encourages the audience to engage with those objects and believe that they represent something else. So it was important for me that the treasure baskets in the show connected to the show. So unlike the random nature of Goldschmidt's objects, albeit chosen for their interesting textures, shapes and sizes, the objects were chosen because they had a relationship to one of the beds in the show. So for example, there's a whole seascape scene, and so we put a small shell starfish in and a sponge puff, which represented seaweed in the show. We put things in the basket that had that connection to what was being seen as well. And so each bed had at least 2 corresponding objects in the basket, and they were very carefully chosen to ensure, again, a range of materials, of textures, of colours, of sizes. Another key difference was that that there were only around 25 objects in the bed's basket, rather than the 80 to 100 that Goldschmied suggests. But it felt ample for the time frame, given that the stay and play was only 25 minutes, and we didn't find that any of the children were lacking in engagement. Obviously, Goldschmied suggests a really good, intense hour of engaging with a treasure basket. We didn't have the luxury of that time, but we did so sort of minimizing those objects and ensuring a correlation with the show felt that it was more appropriate in terms of the adaptation on how we were using the baskets. The other reason for wanting the objects to connect to the show was to provide a much more unified experience. So, you know, for Froebel, everything is based on unity, and I wanted to cement the show, the stay and play, and the show, rather than having them feel like they were two fragmented activities, seemingly unconnected. Given the short time frame of the stay and play, though, I did want to provide a resource for parents to continue using baskets at home. So I wrote a downloadable guide on creating treasure baskets to give them further guidance so that they could take something home and create their own baskets when they got there. If you could move to the next slide for me, please. Thank you. So the stay and play started with the performer explaining what a treasure basket was and handing them out so that every child in the audience had their own basket to play with. And the role of the performer immediately switched to facilitator. It was her role to then guide and support the parents if they needed it. The show itself began with and ended with a lullaby, which perfectly signaled the beginning and ending of the show. The audience were immediately captivated by the performer. As Helen Toby says, a singing voice attracts children's attention far more easily than a normal voice, and it's so true. The audience coming in, and they were all sort of all over the place, and the minute the performer started to sing, she had their attention 100%. So this is, I don't know if we're going to be able to play it, but this is the opening lullaby of the show. Let's try and see. Ooh.
Come in all sizes, single or double, cot size or cradle, king size or trundle. Most beds are beds for sleeping or resting, but the best beds are much more interesting. Not just a white little, tucked in tight little, nighty-night little, turn out the light little bed. Instead, a bed for fishing, a bed for cats, meow, a bed for a troupe of acrobats. The right sort of bed, if you see what I mean, is a bed that might be a submarine.
So I'm afraid I'm not going to take you into the world of the submarine right now, but the next slide also plays the lullaby that bookends the show. Is at the end of the show as well. So if we just play that, if we can.
Beds on the ground, beds in the sky, beds underwater, beds that can fly, whoosh! Beds that are hot, beds that are cold, brr. Beds that are surely a sight to behold. Strange and special and full of surprises, beds of amazing shapes and sizes. Not just a white little, tucked in tight little, nighty-night little, turn out the light little bed.
So as well as the lullabies, the entire show is underscored with atmospheric music, and it utilizes quite interesting and recognizable sound effects to help the beds. So musicality is incredibly important in this show in helping just one way of engaging the senses. So I wanted the stay and play to include some music as well. We chose to play the same music that we used for the submarine underscoring during the show to play during the stay and play, because it was just really tranquil and really relaxing, and thought it was a really nice piece of music to underscore, to play whilst the children were engaged in their treasure baskets. But I also decided to end the stay and play with a tidy up song, which was sung to the familiar tune of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. I think if you can just go on to the next slide for me.
Reds on the ground.
No, the next
Red
one,
to the
sorry.
Sky.
This one. If you hit the sound button on the cross there, please forgive my singing. It's much better when the performer sings this, I promise, but I don't have a clip of her singing it. So this is just what we used at the end of the stay and play to gather up the treasure baskets. Now it's time to put away all the objects from our play. Put them in the basket now, just like I do, this is how. Good night, treasures, here you'll stay, sleeping till another day. Again, and that was beautifully underscored with some much better music than there. But it was obviously the importance of that was threefold, in that it signaled the end of the experience, it aided the tidying up of the treasure baskets, but most importantly for me, music is such a key component in children's learning. It just felt like it was a really great way of ending and signifying the end of the show. I'm realizing that I'm running out of time, partly because we've had some technical difficulties as well. But if we can just move on to the next slide. That would be great. If you want to just click them all on for me, because I'm not going to be able to, in the minute that I've got left, go through them all. But basically, fundamentally, the key findings from the stay and play were that the minute we introduced the treasure basket, rather than just expecting parents to be able to engage with their children just by handing them some props, it really worked. It was much more successful. The tidy up song at the end was really helping kind of getting us to move on. We were presenting the show at a time that when COVID was looming. We kind of weren't sure how it was all going to play out, and we realized actually that risk about touching, and even in that climate, wasn't something that parents were concerned about. So it was basically it wasn't something that we had to overly worry about. Actually, it really helped them to engage. If you just want to pop onto the next slide for me. I think somebody asked in the chat whether how possible it was to get hold of a copy of the guidance that I created. That I can share that for sure, and I think it might be available on Little Angel Theatre's website as well. It was certainly available when we did the YouTube version of the show, but actually that guide talks about all the things that I was going to talk about now, which is the role of the adult, and really how the adult supports the child in terms of absolutely exploring that treasure basket, and ensuring that the experience is meaningful. So I think the success of that side of it is really difficult for me to monitor, because I have no idea whether parents actually took it home and used it or not. But I can really, all I can do is hope that they do. I think I'll probably have to stop there.
Yes, I'm going to have to stop you there. Apologies for the technical difficulties that we had, and hopefully we'll be able to come back for some of the exciting questions that we've had come through during your session at the end. So now I would like to introduce Rachel Tonkin. Rachel is the Director of Communications at Family Lives, with her presentation, Singing with Baby. Thank you, Rachel.
So I'm Rachel, I'm from Family Lives. I'm really pleased to be speaking to you all today. And I'm going to tell you about our project funded by the Froebel Trust to create short, accessible videos about singing with your baby or young child. So I'll first tell you a bit about Family Lives, why we wanted to create these videos and the aims, how we went about it, and some of the lessons, as well as the songs we all learned along the way. And then I'll be showing you a couple of the videos, and do feel free to sing along. So just a bit about the charity I work for. And to put this project into the wider context of what we do. So we were set up in 1973 by volunteers to provide families with somewhere to turn before they reached crisis point. Family Lives is a family support charity providing early intervention and crisis support to families across the UK who may be vulnerable and on lower incomes. We provide vital support through services such as our helpline and online chat, our online advice and resources, and also through befriending and home visiting services in local communities across some areas of England, not everywhere, but several areas. So we support families with many different issues, ranging from divorce and separation, coping with the aggression from children or teenagers, bullying, to families who are involved with social services. So we're really proud of the number of families we reach and support every year. So last year, over 2 million parents accessed our website. We answered over 32,000 calls to our helpline, which is a confidential helpline. Supported over 6,000 adults and young people through our community services as well. And a key element to how we do all this and support so many families are our amazing volunteers who work on our helpline. They work on the live chat. They provide the services in the local communities as well, and donated over 15,000 hours last year to support families, which I'm sure you agree is amazing. So just to move on to our project, the videos, and how it fits in with the wider work that we do. We were approached by the Trust to see if this is something we'd be interested in doing. And it resonated for us because of the work we already do around the early years. This includes, as I mentioned before, our online advice for parents with babies and toddlers around early years development, which we've now increased since doing this project actually. And also because it really aligned with another program we do called Parent Child Plus, which is a home learning program which supports vulnerable families where a child is at risk of being left behind. And we currently deliver this in several areas across England, providing outreach support in Westminster and a mobile play service in Bexley. So we had a perfect audience for these videos, and it was a really good fit for us. And also we've made over 200 videos before on general parenting topics for ranging from babies to teenagers. Some of the baby ones included bonding with your baby, and also things like how having a baby will change your life. So for us, creating videos to support parents and carers to sing with their child was a really natural fit, and we were very excited to get going on this project. In short, the project was to create a suite of videos to promote singing with your baby or young child based on the Froebelian principles. As we know, children are born ready, able and eager to learn and interact with other people and the world around them. And singing with your child or young child or baby is a great way of connecting with them and aiding their cognitive, language and emotional development. We wanted to create videos which were short and accessible and featured real parents and their children. And an important element was to show parents how to sing with their babies, such as demonstrating the actions and the interactions, but also to explain why it's important and how it helps their child's development and their relationship with them. And to ensure the videos were accessible, we included subtitles in the top 6 languages in the UK at the time. So just to give you some of the key aims that we wanted to achieve in the videos, they needed to be short and accessible. Needed to encourage parents to sing with their child if they haven't done so before, by keeping it simple or giving them ideas and tips on how to do this. But we also wanted to show what the benefits are to parent and child, as well as having parents speaking directly about why they like singing with their child and how they think it helps. And we also included some short on-screen tips as well, which viewers could read, so that perhaps if you were watching with the sound off, you could still see what was going on. When we were first approached with the idea of creating these videos, we wanted to make sure we knew what was out there in the market and what was already available to parents, and work out what we needed to do to make ours different, and also to fulfill the remit. We found that most videos available, such as on YouTube, were based on cartoons or drawings, or just featured an adult singing the song without showing any of the interaction between the adult or parent and the child. So it's kind of missing that vital interaction element. So we wanted this to be a key focus of our videos, to support parents who may not be sure how to do this, or don't remember, or just need a few tips, or they've forgotten the actions to say Incy Wincy Spider. It's often a long time ago that we sang those. So we wanted to focus on the movements, the interaction, the facial expressions, to really explain why movements are important and how they help in development. and how the interaction between the parent and the child is also beneficial. So I just thought I'd summarise some of the benefits of singing together, which I'm sure many of you will already know, and maybe you think of some other ones too. So it supports the bond between the parent and child. It supports their language development. It supports their brain development. It supports also the links to their culture and improving understanding of different cultures all around them as well. And it can support their understanding of the natural world, such as the insects in the garden, the weather, and other things we see around us every day. So just to give you a bit more about our approach to this, in terms of where did we start and how did we make these. So the first thing we needed to do was learn more about Froebel and the Froebelian principles, and specifically about singing with babies and young children. So a colleague and I attended several days of training with a really amazing trainer, and we started on that journey. We felt immediately that the principles very much aligned with our approach as a charity and really resonated with us, and specifically with some of the work we do in the early years. I mentioned Parent Child Plus earlier, and it's a very similar kind of philosophy to that. We learned so much about why singing with your child benefits their development, and specifically things such as the progression of actions, from using small actions in certain songs to the larger actions involving the whole body, such as in that old favourite, heads, shoulders, knees and toes. It also helped us to ensure we featured songs that were suitable for very young babies to the older toddlers, and in terms of that progression. So once we had an understanding of the principles and what we needed to include in the videos, we then needed to work on the more practical elements. So after approaching several video production agencies, we selected an agency that's a specialist film production company with lots of experience in that area. And in fact, we'd actually worked with them before on previous parenting advice videos, which was really helpful because they knew our kind of ethos as a charity and what we were looking for. So we then had to find songs which were suitable and aligned with the Froebelian principles, and secondly, which we were either out of copyright or we could purchase the rights to use them, which wasn't quite as straightforward as you'd imagine. It's quite hard to find out some of this information sometimes. And then we needed to select the relevant languages to also include, and we did that by looking at the top 6 spoken languages in the UK at the time, which were English, Polish, Arabic, Bangladeshi, Punjabi, and Turkish. So how did the videos turn out? Well, I'll show you a few in a minute, but we were pleased that we managed to include all the messages that we wanted to portray. And it was very important to us, as I say, that we worked with real parents and their children, and we ended up with videos that featured dads and mums, one grandmother, and they're from a diverse range of cultural backgrounds. As well as singing with their child, the parents and grandmother also talk directly to camera and obviously to the parents watching about why they enjoy singing together and how it helps them and their child. We produced 12 videos in total, including several traditional nursery rhymes such as Old MacDonald, Incy Wincy Spider, Row, row, row your boat, and Pat a Cake, as well as a French nursery rhyme, a traditional Ghanaian song, and also some made-up songs to show parents that they don't need to know all the nursery rhymes, but can make up songs about different things around them, such as animals and the noises they make, or about things around the house or the garden. So I thought it would also be useful to tell you a little bit about what we learned along the way. So although we'd made lots of parenting videos before, this was our first time doing videos which included music so directly and which worked with very young children and babies. We'd originally thought that we would find the parents just through our networks as a charity, the families we supported, but this was actually quite hard to do. So the production agency we were working with managed to help us out with that element. We also found that due to obviously the very young age of children, that filming took a lot longer than we'd planned. Singing is lots of fun, but it's really easy to get distracted, wander off and look out the window, or just not want to sing that particular song. But we got there in the end, and we're really pleased with the result. And in terms of how we shared the videos and communicated about the work we did, obviously we're using our website as a platform. sharing on social media, and we also contacted other relevant organisations about the videos, which worked really well, and offering them kind of blogs and features about the content. And since we've done the videos, we've also been adding more content from Froebel Trust to our website as well, as that is becoming increasingly popular. So the songs show how singing helps children to learn different words. The song I'm going to show you, different words, and learn different names of parts of their body. Children also learn about repetition, matching their actions to the words, and matching their actions to other people's actions. If You're Happy and You Know It shows how parents can show their child how to clap their hands and do it in time to the music, and it even help them to do so. One of the other videos I'm going to show you is head, shoulders, knees and toes, which obviously uses large movements. It teaches the different parts of the body again and involves repetition. So as I said, please do sing along if you wish.
If you're happy.
Singing with Indigo makes me feel close to him. It really allows me to connect with him after a long day at work and kind of make those few hours I have with him really special. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands, clap, clap. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands, clap. If you're happy and you know it and you really want to show it, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands, clap, 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 clap. I think when they're in a mood, when they're upset, maybe singing songs can kind of will them out of that mood. You can just start singing a song and they'll snap into a memory that maybe they remember, oh, it was a nice day we were singing, it was sunny. It's just a way of changing their mood.
Head, shoulders, knees and toes.
Physical action of it. She likes the movement, she likes the jumping around.
Sorry.
Head, shoulders, knees and toes.
The physical action of it. She likes the movement, she likes the jumping around, and it also helps with her you know, physical development of being able to move around in time with the music and the things that she's saying. And it also helps developing her language. Sometimes I leave it so that she can say the word and point to the part of the body. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. And eyes and ears. Where are your ears? And mouth and nose, head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. So repeated actions, repeated phrases, repeated words all help them to make links with things that are going on around them. I also think it really helps with their mathematical development, because the repetition and you know, repeating phrases and then saying them in time with the music, it's having that kind of rhythm that really helps them to understand sequencing and counting in order, I guess, when they get to school.
So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Rachel. And finally, I would like to introduce Angela Voyajolu. Angela recently completed her PhD at the School of Education's Applied Music Research Centre at the University of Roehampton. Over to you, Angela, with Mapping Emerging Musicality, Exploring Musical Development in the Early Years.
Thank you very much for having me, and also for the Froebel Trust who supported my PhD and for letting me share it today. My PhD was finished in September at the University of Roehampton and was also supported by SEMPRE. And it explored early childhood musical development. There we go. Oh, sorry. So first, to give you a little bit of background, before my PhD, from 2012 to 2014, I was involved in a project called Sounds of Intent in the Early Years. And this project sought to understand how children from birth to 7 years develop musically. And the result was a framework of musical development called Sounds of Intent in the Early Years. And this was in turn based on earlier research and a framework simply called Sounds of Intent. And that framework was specifically designed for children with learning difficulties, children and young people. And so the project in 2012 looked at adapting this framework for all children in the early years. And within that project, observations took place in one early childhood setting of about 58 children. And these were snapshot observations, so short observations in the moment rather than looking at children over time. And the impact of contextual factors on children's musical development, these were unexplored. So this kind of inspired me to delve deeper, and some of the research questions I had within my PhD project was how this framework would represent children's development when they were observed over time rather than just within one snapshot moment, and what were those contextual factors that support and encourage musical engagement and development in the early years. And today I'm mostly going to focus on this second question. There's too much to be able to fit in 25 minutes, so I'll just focus on that one mostly today. So the guiding principle here is really play as being central to children's learning and development, and specifically here we'll be looking at musical play and how musical play can support musical learning and musical development in early childhood. And first, just what musical play might look like. Catherine Marsh and Susan Young describe musical play as being self-initiated, although others, they may choose to participate with others, but when this is voluntary, that it's enjoyable, intrinsically motivated, it's free of externally imposed rules, although rules may evolve within the play, and that it includes everyday form of musical activities, so vocalizing, singing, playing with everyday objects, playing with instruments, so everyday musical activity and play. And I thought I should also briefly show you the Sounds of Intent framework of musical development, because I used it within my study. So I'm just going to go through it briefly. This is the framework. It's in a circular form. It was developed through observation as well as the literature on early childhood musical development as well. And it's built on the premise that we're all inherently musical. And it's also built on the premise that we look at what children can do, look at their strengths within their musicality. And in the center of the circle, you'll see that this is really before hearing starts to work. And then I'm pointing to my own screen here, but and then there are these phases of musical development or musical engagement as you move outwards within the circle. So here we see this is all about a kind of sensory exploration of sound, vocalizing, again, playing with everyday objects and instruments on one's own and with others. And then we move out. This is really brief description. We move out here, and this involves children playing with sound through pattern and reacting to pattern, and lots of imitation and copying within sound and music. And then we move outwards here to this fourth ring. And this is all about chunks of music. So children, you might hear singing pieces and bits of songs over and over, or making up little bits of songs on their own and repeating them, or engaging in dialogue with others through them. Actually, as we saw in one of Rachel's videos, where the mother and daughter were singing together, and the daughter was kind of interjecting with parts of the song, but not yet engaging or not yet singing the whole song, but she was engaging with the whole song. And then that leads to this fifth ring, which is all about children singing and playing whole songs gradually in time and in tune. And one important point that I'd like to make is that although they're layered very neatly within the framework, in reality, it's not very neat. So one of the results of the previous research and in my PhD, what we found as well was that these are very layered and they interplay with one another. So when we start to hear pattern, we also start to hear these chunks of music emerging as well at the same time, and so on. So so it's very layered, and it's not linear at all. And one other point to make is that there are 3 domains called domains of musical development. One is how we react to sound and music, how we create sound and music with others. Sorry, that's the green here, and how we create sound and music on our own. So that's a very brief description, but I hope it'll help to make the rest of the presentation clear. So just some details about my project. There were 44 children who participated, the 22 girls and 22 boys, and they ranged in age from 3 months to 5 years. I collected 950 video observation clips. So these were short clips, so the longest was about 5 minutes. And I collected these over a 2-year period in early childhood settings within London, 3 settings in London. And then a smaller group of parents, 17 parents, also observed their children at home, and they sent me observations of their children engaging in music at home. And these observations were varied. So it was spontaneous musical play when children were on their own, musical interactions with peers, as well as with parents, siblings. I wanted to get as wide a variety as I could. So some were in more structured musical games, some were, more during free play. I also had questionnaires to gather further information about children's musical experiences at home. And I interviewed a smaller group of parents, as well as looking at the group as a whole. I wanted to really look at individual musical development over time. So I had 3 in-depth case studies as well. And then I analyzed all these videos in relation to the framework, also in relation to the context and the activity that was happening within them. So the results I'd like to share today are based on that second question of what happens within engagement that supports musical development. And overall, one important thing was just the child engaging with another during musical activity, but I wanted to look at what was going on within that engagement. And the themes which arose were playfulness, multimodality, shared musical culture within. Oh, sorry, I should also say that these are results that that came from the family's observations at home. So yeah, I'm going to focus on that as well. Another factor was a child-led repetition, and also space for solitary musical play. And the next few slides, I'm going to talk about these things in a bit more detail. So first, just some characteristics of playfulness. Sumsian and Harrison described playfulness as being physical, so possibly including things like running, jumping, falling on purpose, and bouncing. It has characteristics of joyfulness and delight, affection, and also humor. I found some wonderful moments of humor within musical interaction and musical play, which I wasn't expecting, but which I was a lovely surprise. So here's just an example of that playfulness. And this video looks at a playful interaction and thinking back to the framework. It's all about pattern and imitation. And this is hopefully you can see this and hear this all right.
Com'è Carmen? Bella! Bella! Com'è Carmen? Bella, bella, bella.
So yeah, that kind of description of playfulness, really, I feel like this is really clear within this example. And something else that really I think is clear within this example is also not only playfulness, and not only sound, but it's very multimodal. There's a lot going on, and that was the next kind of theme that came out of activities and what was going on within interactions that supported musical engagement and development. And there's research does show that this multimodality is very present, in singing between carers and child, the facial expression, often holding, or as we saw in Rachel's videos, all those action songs, as well as in the wider musical experiences. So for example, children's kind of innate response to music by bouncing and moving. And I just like this quote as well, because she talks about how we might be hearing the sound pattern, but it's very intertwined with the movement that goes along with it and the gesture. And I thought that was very clear within that first example as well. And here's another example that I feel kind of combines those two things. So this is the same child. I should have said it before. She was about 13 months, and here she's about 21 months. And another form of engagement, again, we're going to hear happy and you know it. And I just feel like this example shows how movement is used to help with the structure of the song. There's some humor here. This scarf that Dad is wearing is usually a scarf that she wears on her head, so he put it on himself as a kind of joke. So I'll play that for you now.
La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la.
So just very briefly, to show that the movement is very much within the structure of the song and how he's guiding that. They're shaking during the call version, the call portion of the song, and then they're rising and lifting during the "we are" response, and he's helping also with his facial expression. I don't know if you could see that he doesn't sing along with her, but he mouths the words along with her, and he's not singing the words, he's just singing on law, but she still gets that whole structure. And within this one video, we're seeing a pattern and imitation, and we're also seeing those fragments. So she's responding just with the fragments of the song, but then that's within the context of the whole song as well. So there's so much going on, and I felt that there's also a lot of playfulness here, and it's in a more kind of structured activity, but there's still a lot of playfulness, I felt, and that multimodality is still there. And it reminded me of I hope I say her name right, Theano Kutupilu wrote a paper on musical play in the Froebelian principle of play within early years education, and she talked about adults and children being partners in play, and I feel that those are I really love that term, and I thought these two examples fit that well, as fit that description well. So something else that came up was shared musical culture, and this was specifically, again, something that themes that arose at home. And this was parents and carers sharing music and activities that were kind of grounded in their own histories, their own preferences, and their own culture. And these are a few examples that I won't read them all out, but just so you can read them. One was a mom who danced a lot herself as a teenager, and she loved dance, and so she danced a lot with her daughter, and then her daughter grew to love dance as well, and this formed a large part of their musical interaction at home. Another was specifically related to music listening, and that was the second quote here of a CD that was from the boys' parents' youth that they listened to together, and then they started listening to it as a family, and he kind of latched onto this CD. And the dad said it became kind of a soundtrack to their lives, and they used the different tracks for different purposes, and again in a playful way. So one track started out slowly and got faster and faster, and so they would listen to this a lot, and they'd run around the room kind of playing with that pattern together, so playing together. This last quote I found was really interesting because it was it was about singing songs that were made up that the child's grandmother would sing to him, and these were used for, oh, I don't know, it's complicated, used for his mum. So what I felt was important about this was that parents were sharing their music with their children, and in very specific and special moments, and they kind of shared the music, but also shared their enjoyment of the music and their love of the music. And then the children seemed to also love this music and these activities as well. And yeah, and I felt that this was very sorry. This was something that emerged within the observations that I wasn't expecting. Another thing that I found was child-led repetition. And so this was very much about children who engaged with songs and activities again and again, but on their own terms. So they would ask to hear the same music again and again. They'd ask to sing the same songs over and over again over time. And sometimes for specific periods of time. So they might ask to repeat a same song over and over and over. And then, you know, in a few months, it would be another song. And for one boy in particular, we have these amazing observations of him. His favorite song was Old MacDonald, and he just loved to sing this. And so we have observations of him singing this over a 2-year period, which is amazing. And this was from himself. So how this repetition helped him to learn about music and about singing. This other example here, is the same, actually it's the same little girl in the other videos that we saw, where her mother described that when she was around 12 months, she had this kind of ritual where she would sing these same 2 songs 3 times every night and then fall asleep. And this is when she was 12 months. So this is around the same time as that first video. So you can see how those different ways of engaging with music are so layered and happen at the same time. But this also leads to the next thing that I found, was that the solitary musical play and that space for exploring music alone was also important. And this was a space where they can children could kind of revisit and play creatively with the music that they heard in other contexts. And Martian Young explained this type of musical play where you take something and you combine it. So you take bits and pieces of songs and combine them. And in the literature, it's also called potpourri music. And one of the mums called it her child's remix songs. And I thought that described it really well. And Meryl Soul has done some wonderful research looking at these private moments at bedtime and how children use that space to play with music and explore music and to comfort themselves as well. And she talks about the functions of that space. And I have a short audio clip here of a little boy during his nap time, which represents this. Hopefully you can hear it.
Na 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 time. 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 Idea time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Oh, sorry. So you can hear how he takes the words nap time and he incorporates them into the tune of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or Baba Black Sheep. And he combines those 2 things and he plays with it. And then the Tidy Up Time song enters. And I'm guessing that's one that he's been hearing in nursery and brought home. So this is just to kind of sum up. This is the framework again, and I can see it's a little bit blurry. But what I wanted to show was that that the framework, while it represents musical development in early childhood, how important it is to consider the context that surrounds that musical development. And that's immediate interactions with others in the moment, but also interactions that occur in other spaces, and how children bring those into their musical engagement and play with them, as we heard in that last little clip. And all those opportunities for children to listen to and explore and play with sound and music, and how these two things are interrelated, and how musical development is not occurring on its own, but is very much in interplay with what's going on around the child. And just some other projects and programs that are involving the Sounds of Intent in the Early Years framework. There was a project that was going on simultaneously to my PhD, and this was led by the charity Soundabout. It finished in 2018, and that was about bringing music to children and parents, having music groups for children and parents, and it looked at musical development as well as wider development. There's a music service called Little Amber, and this is the Amber Trust music service for blind and partially sighted children and families, and it uses the framework. Little Soundabout is a project being run by the charity Soundabout. And Imagine is kind of an umbrella project. It's called Ideas for Musical Activities and Games in the Early Years, and there's underway a project with Live Music Now, the charity, to look at promoting free music resources for new parents. There's another project called Imagine Deafness and Hearing Loss, and that's underway and looking at supporting families of deaf children in the early years. And that's with Adam Ockelford and Hannah Marsden. And then finally, a project called Tuning into Autism, and that's based on Caitlin Shaughnessy's doctoral study, also at the University of Roehampton, and in partnership with Soundabout, and looking at evaluating music resources using animation as well. And my references. And finally, just a thank you to the Froebel Trust and Sempre for supporting my project, and especially to all the families and settings who took part, and to my supervisors.